My name is Brent Iverson. I'm the Dean of the School of Undergraduate Studies, and I'd like to welcome you to the 9th Annual University Lecture Series. Before we begin, I'd like to ask people a question, kind of trying to see who we've got in the audience here. So what I want you to do is I want you to raise your hand if you have been in class for 3 hours today at least. Wow. 4 hours, keep your hand up. 5 hours? 6 hours?
Yikes. Holy cow.
All right. Anybody in the class here was in class today for 7 hours?
We have someone in the balcony.
All right. Someone in the balcony has got their hand up?
Yes.
Okay, give them a free Starbucks. People who had 6 hours, raise your hand again. All right. If you were born in the month of March, keep your hand up. We don't have that many cards. Between March 1st and 15th. All right. A couple of cards.
Wow.
All right.
I'm getting it.
While they're handing those out, I want to give a special shout out to Dr. McKay's class. Those of you in that class know why. But what I want to do is kind of introduce what we're going to be talking about tonight. So the whole idea behind the University Lecture Series is that we bring you some of our most distinguished faculty, and we talk about things that are interesting not only to faculty but also students. So tonight what you're going to hear about is all the things that you kind of had experience with, but if you're like me, you wonder about. That's what goes on in your mind. What is learning? What are all the things that help you figure things out? What's really going on? What are those processes? Well, these two gentlemen are experts, and you may have heard of them because they are on a popular NPR radio show on KUT called Two Guys on Your Head. These are the two guys. Our first guy, hand up.
Or stand up.
Bob, yeah, Bob.
Okay.
There we go.
All right.
Bob Duke is professor, he's a former studio musician, a public school music teacher, and currently he's the head of the Music and Human Learning program in the Butler School of Music and the director for the Center of Music Learning. Professor Duke has directed national research efforts under the sponsorship of such organizations as the National Piano Foundation and the International Suzuki Institute. He's been teaching at UT for 30 years, and he's been awarded a number of prestigious awards, including, most recently, the Friar Centennial Teaching Fellowship.
Thanks.
And he's the past chair of the UT Academy of Distinguished Teachers.
Also true.
Our second guy, Art Markman, is an outstanding professor in the Department of Psychology in the College of Liberal Arts. Yeah, I expected a little more when I said that.
I know.
Okay. And he's the founding director of the university's program in Human Dimensions of Organizations. He's a former I wasn't in the script. He's a former executive editor of the journal Cognitive Science, and is a frequent blogger for the Harvard Business Review, the Huffington Post, and Psychology Today. So please welcome the co-host of the NPR radio show, Two Guys on Your Head.
Thank you. Thanks, Dean Iverson. Art and I are very happy to be here and very privileged to get to talk to you about things that we're interested in a lot. And we find that when we talk about these things to other people, most people are interested in them too.
Even when we're talking about it.
That's right. I just want to tell you a little bit about how this thing came about. I mean, Art and I had no idea that we would ever be on the radio, although, as Art says, many people have told us that we have good faces for radio. But a very bright producer at KUT, the public radio station here on campus, which is right over there, named Rebecca McEnroy, invited us to give a talk at the Cactus Cafe, which is in the Union, which is also right over there, and to talk about brains and learning and how our minds work. And it was very popular, and we did it again. It was very popular. And she said, well, let's put this on the radio. And now it's on the radio. We've been on the radio a little over 2 years. And I think what we'd like to bring to you tonight are some of the ideas that not only most people find interesting about how brains work that are not particularly intuitive, but also things that would be useful to all of you in thinking about how do you create circumstances for yourself that help you learn more effectively, more efficiently, and create memories that are more persistent and more retrievable in the future.
Yeah. So we're going to start off with a question that you should never ask, okay? Is this going to be on the exam? Okay? Which I suspect one or two of you may have at least thought about in the past. And I want you to understand that now that you're here at UT, it's time to stop doing well in class and start doing well in life. And one of the ways that you do that is by recognizing that the answer to the question, is this going to be on the exam, is yes. It just might not be the exam for that particular class. Because the thing about succeeding in life is that you don't know which thing that you learned was going to turn out to matter until after. Right? So if you look at the history of really great ideas, nobody wakes up and thinks, oh, that's the piece, that's the thing I needed to learn in order to do this great thing. Instead, you just learn a bunch of stuff, and then afterwards, you are reminded of some key piece of information. And that key piece of information turned out to be the linchpin in the really cool thing you did. And then you look back on it. So like Steve Jobs gives that great commencement speech, and he talks about learning about fonts, as if when he was sitting in stealing a lecture from another school, he knew that fonts were going to be important someday. But he paid attention and he learned it, and that ended up mattering.
You know, and one of the things that we think about a lot and talk about a lot, and some of our research programs actually delve into this a little bit, is what leads to people being successful beyond school. I mean, all of you wouldn't be here if you haven't learned to be good at school. And we're very confident, I know Dean Iverson is as well, that all of you are good at school. And I think if you read the blurb that we put together about this talk tonight, one of the things that we'd like to focus on is how you transition from being a really good student to being a really good thinker. There's a misperception. If I learn to be a good student, which usually involves this, you go into a class, teacher meets you, gives you the expectations, you look at the expectations, you think, now what I'm going to do is meet these expectations to the best of my ability. Now, that's not a bad thing in and of itself. But the thing, I don't know if this is distressing news or optimistic news, that's not enough. Everybody whom we know, and we do a lot of studies about people who are successful in various domains of human endeavor, and not only in business and in music, but in other domains as well. And the key, the underlying variable that runs through all of their ways of thinking and ways of behaving is an intellectual and emotional flexibility. Now, a lot of what happens in school, even here at UT, will in some ways push you away from flexibility and push you to a place that I've got to figure out exactly what I'm supposed to do and do just that. And one of the things that Art and I talk about a lot when we're working not only with people who are college students like this, but working with professionals and those kinds of things, is what do you do when you don't know what you're supposed to do? And that's often the key that leads to people's long-term success. It's not knowing what to do. It's having some ideas about what kinds of things you can do when you don't know what you're supposed to do. Yeah. And that's what we'd like to spend a little time on today.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. In fact, how many of you have ever played like those goofy kind of party game problems, you know, that they give you, like, you know, if you've ever seen the 9-dot problem where you've got 9 dots, you're supposed to draw 4 lines through it without lifting the pen, or they give you a bunch of coins and they tell you you gotta be able to make 4 lines of 8 coins with this many coins. You ever played games like that? Anybody?
Four people that play games like that.
Nobody else ever has. Well, never mind then. But the thing is that when you play those goofy kinds of party games, and now they're less fun because you just Google the answer, I guess. But if you play those kinds of games, you often feel kind of stupid when you play them because you think, I didn't get the answer. I don't even know what to do in this. The reason that you feel so lost when you play those games is because they don't remind you of anything. And it turns out that when you get stuck solving a problem, when you have absolutely no idea what to do, it turns out the reason that you're stuck is because your memory isn't giving you any information about what to do in this particular circumstance, because human beings don't have much in the way of a kind of evolutionary endowment to do much interesting. We figure out how to do stuff interesting by learning to do it, which is why you guys are in, more or less your 18th year of life, and you're still not cooked yet. Right? You're still going to school because there's still a lot of knowledge that you need to have. Now, the reason that I'm saying all of this is because if you are going to succeed at solving problems when you've gotten stuck, it ultimately means you're going to need to come up with strategies for being reminded of something you know that's going to help you to solve the problem. When people say, I'm going to think outside the box, it's not like they've got some extra cognitive process, some supercharged thing that now they're going to bring to bear. The only way that you think in a new way is by allowing yourself to be reminded of a piece of information that nobody else thought was relevant when they were trying to solve that problem.
Yeah, and I want to say just a little bit about Art's comment about you're not fully cooked yet. No offense, but we're old guys and you're young people. What do you think the age is that a human brain actually reaches its full maturity? Anybody have a guess? It's mid-20s. Now, we used to think 60 years ago that babies were born with the brains that they were going to have for the rest of their lives. And whatever you were born with, that was the brain you've got. But actually, we know much better now. We know much more now. And know that your brain is developing in ways that we didn't possibly imagine 60 years ago, that goes all the way until you're in your mid-20s. Now, brains sort of develop in the order in which brains evolved. So the last part of the brain to develop is this part in the front. And you know what lives here? Do you have a guess? Judgment and inhibitory responses. So when you're driving home, and you're still living with your parents, and your curfew's at 11, and it's 10 minutes to 11, and you're 20 minutes away from home, and you think to yourself, well, I don't see any on the road. I should just floor it and see what happens. Now, if you're our age, this part of our brain says, yeah, but that would be stupid. But this part of your brain isn't done yet. So it isn't there to tell you that. So you go, right? And I think one of the things that's interesting about this for all of you is you're in a very cool time of life when you as a human being have almost all of your physical and mental capacities. What you don't have, and again, no offense, this is said in love, is you don't have a good governor, right? Is it the things that seem to you really attractive, you want to go there and do that, even when they might be not the wisest decision to make, or they might even be dangerous, or those kinds of things? Those things seem more attractive to you than they would when you're 26. Now, the thing that's interesting about this is this has to do with the actual physiology of your machine. It doesn't have to do with the fact you haven't learned anything, or you've not been paying attention, or anything like that. It has to do with the actual physiology of the brain. And one of the things that Art and I talk about a lot that we find so interesting is how brains develop over time and what that means in terms of the way that all of us learn to behave.
Yeah. And while we're on the topic of that physiology, it turns out that one of the most important things that you can do in college is likely to be the thing that you avoid doing as much as possible, and that is sleep. So it turns out that when you are, under the age of 30, sleep is incredibly important for your brain. in a number of ways. So for one thing, the brain actually cleans out toxins from the day when you sleep. And, you know, there might be ways when you're in college that toxins could get into your brain. It would be nice to clear them out. So sleep helps with that. More importantly...
Why are you laughing? What's funny?
More importantly, I'll explain it later.
Okay, thanks.
More importantly, your brain continues learning while you're asleep. So think about this. By the time you hit 18 years of age, you've probably been asleep for almost 6 years of your life, which is a little scary, which means that you have spent, your brain must be doing something interesting, and part of what it's doing is continuing to learn. So your brain continues to learn skills that you've tried to acquire. It also continues to learn information. And so it's really important after you study for something to go to sleep to help solidify that. The brain helps you to pay attention better when you sleep. And the other thing that happens when you sleep is that the areas of your brain, there are two areas on either side of your brain called each side they're called the hippocampus. Together I guess they're hippocampi.
Nicely done.
Because they're shaped a little bit like seahorses. And those areas of the brain, when you don't sleep, they don't function so well. And even if you drink coffee, that wonder drug that works wonders, it doesn't actually make those areas of the brain work better. So staying up a couple of extra hours at night actually has a really negative impact on you for the whole next day.
Yeah. Let me just ask, just a show of hands. How many of you last night slept less than 7 hours? Raise your hand. Okay. Yeah, I was like, you're looking at me like, what are you, stupid? Of course I didn't sleep 7 hours.
Did anyone sleep 7 hours who wasn't ill?
Yeah.
One.
Okay.
One.
So let's just talk about that a little bit. I mean, I know we're old, you know, Art's a fatherly type, I'm a grandfatherly type, but we're going to say this anyway. You know, right now, the prevailing wisdom in psychology of what we think of as now, like what's happening now, is a window about 3 seconds wide, right? That's what we think of as now. And then after 3 seconds, it's then, and there's a new now. So in a typical waking day for somebody who does sleep 7 to 8 hours a day, there are as many as 20,000 nows in a day, most of which are entirely forgotten. Good, right? There will be no advantage to my remembering the people I passed walking over to Hogg Auditorium from my office tonight, because there's no advantage to my remembering that.
You passed me.
Well, yes, but that I remember because you're so dear. Is that while I was walking over here, all those things are forgotten because there's no advantage for my remembering those things. So the question you have to ask as a learner, what would motivate your brain to spend the biological energy it takes to remember something? Because one of the things that Art said about what happens during sleep, I'll just tell you a little bit about a metaphor that people often use for brains. We use computer memory for organic memory as a metaphor, right? So when you're working on your computer and you decide to save something, you hit the save command. What your computer does, it looks for a blank space on the drive. It writes what you just wanted to save, and by writes, I mean binary switches flip from 1 to 0, 0 to 1 in some configuration that represents what you saved. It puts an address on it. So barring some malfunction or some catastrophic thing to your computer, you can go back the next day, the next week, the next month, the next year, click on the icon for that thing that you saved, and it will go find it. And it will be just like it was where you left it, barring some malfunction, right? And anything that was on the drive before you saved that stuff will have no effect on what's there. Anything you save on the drive after you save that stuff will have no effect on the stuff, barring some malfunction. Now, I take the time to say all that because organic brains don't work anything like that. All of you in this room right now are having a different experience than the person sitting next to you. Not only because you're sitting in a different place and so your visual perspective is a little different, your auditory perspective is a little different, the seat feels a little different to you, whatever, but because all of you came into the auditorium with a different set of memories in your head. And what all your brains are trying to figure out right now is how does what's going on right now connect to what's already in there? So everybody's right now is different from everybody else's right now. Now that's a mess. And what happens when we sleep is our brains clean up the mess. And they make sense of what happened during the day. If we don't sleep, that sense-making doesn't happen. And it's not just that we're groggy the next day, it's that many of the things that we learned and our brains decided maybe I should remember this go away. Now, that's the thing to think about just from an economic standpoint. If you're studying and you're saying, I'm going to stay up 2 hours more and study till 2 o'clock for my 8 o'clock test, we're pretty confident, and there's a lot of data to support what we say, that up to 30% of what you studied that whole day for that test is going to be gone by 8 o'clock in the morning because you didn't get a full night's sleep. So sleep is not for sissies. Sleep is for smart people who want to retain what they study. There's my little, that's a cross-stitch on a
There you
pillow.
go.
There you go, I know, okay.
We've been well known to recommend cross-stitching pillows with key phrases,
yeah.
which every 18-year-old
knows about cross-stitching.
Yeah, exactly. So we want you to sleep. Another thing we want you to do that fits with a lot of data is if you really want to do something smart, do something different. So here's another thing. If you begin to look, for example, at the history of innovation, and innovation is a great buzzword, and really, all of us these days, we want to be innovative. If you look at real innovators, one of the things that they do extraordinarily well is to make connections among areas of their knowledge that they didn't realize in advance were going to be important. So, for example, James Dyson invented this vacuum cleaner that doesn't need a bag in it. And the way that he was able to do that was while thinking about vacuum cleaners, he was reminded, as so many people are, of sawmills. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever seen a sawmill. I've only seen them in cartoons. In a cartoon, right, there's a blade, and then there's a log, and then there's a body on the log, right? And in a real sawmill, there's still a blade, there's still a log, there are, generally speaking, fewer bodies on the log. But one thing that there is in a real sawmill is a tremendous amount of sawdust, and what they do is they actually have essentially a gigantic vacuum cleaner, sucks the sawdust out of the air. Most sawmills, though, don't have gigantic vacuum cleaner bags that they fill up, because they'd fill up really quickly. They'd constantly be changing the bag. So what they have instead is this interesting device that's called an industrial cyclone that's actually a cone-shaped device, and the air comes in and it spins around. The sawdust gets thrown to the side through centrifugal force, it goes down into a hopper, it gets trucked away. Well, at some random point in his life, Dyson learned about sawmills and industrial cyclones, and then at some point while thinking about vacuum cleaners, had this really great idea that maybe he could bring these two concepts together, build a little tiny industrial cyclone into a home vacuum cleaner. And this created a business that brings in hundreds of millions of dollars a year, which seems pretty cool to me, actually.
Yeah.
But the only way that he was able to do this was by being willing to learn something that didn't seem the least bit relevant at the time that he learned it. And so one of the other things that's really important to do is to nurture your openness. Now, there are 5 basic personality characteristics that personality psychologists talk about, and one of them is openness to experience. And some people are totally open to experience. Bungee jumping? Sure. Great new movie? Sure. New device? Sure. And then there are some people not so open to experience. They're the ones who eat the same thing at the restaurant every single time that they go. They like to read the same books over and over again. Read the Harry Potter books like 37 times.
I love those books.
They're great.
I know.
Great, but
fantastic.
And so if you're a little bit on that closed end of things where you sometimes shy away from stuff because you think, why am I ever going to need to know this? College is a great time to cast that off and say, you know what? I have no earthly idea why I'm going to need to know this, but you never know, and so I'm going to know this. And if you do that, you put yourself in the situation of the most innovative people who have got lots of stuff in their heads that it's kind of like an old junk shop, right? That you're going to find the thing you need when it turns out you need it.
You know, I think it's very possible when you're in a great university like this and you're working with great faculty, all of whom are very passionate about what they do and what they want you to learn from them, that they have lots of stuff to ask you to do, and it seems overwhelming because they don't talk to each other. They just think your entire life revolves around their class, and so they give you your syllabus and the things you need to do. And that's understandable because they really care a lot and they want you to learn this stuff. But I think one of the things that all of us have opportunities to do, and all the people we see who are not only successful as university students when we look at this systematically, but as importantly, more importantly, successful beyond their university experience, are people who strike out and do things that are not asked of them by other people. I know, when I talk to my undergraduate students in my building, here's the most common answer I get to a question: how's it going? And somebody says, busy. It's like, that's the response. How you doing? Busy. And I'm thinking, okay, that's okay. But I mean, have you taken a walk today? Did you read a book that wasn't assigned? And of course, the thought is, who the hell has time for that? Are you crazy? I'm taking 17 hours. I've got all this stuff. Who has time to do that? Well, the answer is, you have time to do that. I mean, what Art and I spend a lot of time talking about is happiness and well-being and joy. And one way, almost certainly, not to be happy is to spend your entire days completing the tasks that other people have assigned to you and not taking time to do things that you want to do. Now, that may seem like anathema to this, but I tell you a story. I'm an academic advisor in my college, in my department. So students often come to me, and a student comes and say, Dr. Duke, I'm really getting burnt out with school. I'm really kind of, just saying. And then this person's a sophomore, and I'm really kind of burnt out. I said, well, tell me about it. They said, well, I just feel like I can't get anything, I'm just tired of it, And what I say to them often is, well, you should drop out. Now, see, they look at me like some of you look at me. You're my academic advisor. You're not supposed to say drop out. But actually, I'm sincere in that. I mean, if you're unhappy, and you wake up every day and thinking, man, I'm really unhappy, and you kind of go through this day because, the day will come when all this is over, and then I'll start being happy, I promise you, the likelihood of that day coming is very remote. So the question you got to ask yourself is, what things can I do for myself every day, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it happens to be, that I decide something that brings a little joy into my experience, whatever that happens to be. And the thing is, when Art and I think about this, when we're thinking about adults as well, you know this, there are many adults who have job responsibilities that seem very weighty to them and, just difficult, and they just never have a time when they can actually experience on a regular basis, not just on the weekends, joy every day. And when you set that up as to be part of your habit, you change the way the week turns out. Art and I did a show 2 weeks ago on days of the week. And I like the show very much because I made Art and Rebecca sing with me the song Monday, Monday by the Mamas and Papas, and we sounded terrible. It was great. But one of the things that was interesting about that to us is we were talking about how different days of the week take on different personalities, And when you get to Friday, you think, God, it's Friday, and then everybody goes berserk for 2 days before Monday starts again. And one of the things that we know from many, many reams of data is that the people whose lives are the most joyful and the most happy are the people whose lives don't change that much from day to day. Right? There are joyful things that happen during the week. There might be a few things that are task-related that happen over the weekend. But going from one day to the next, from the weekday to the weekend, there's a stability in that helps not only your mind, but your body as well regulate itself in a way that's very productive.
Yeah, and one of the things we said in that show is that TGIF are the 4 saddest letters in the English language. Because frankly, if you structure your life so that you just can't wait to get till Friday every week, you're doing something wrong Monday to Friday.
Yeah.
Right? And part of what that requires is really choosing to do the thing you want to do. So I'll tell you about a little psychology experiment that got done years ago. Back in the day, right, they'd have fluorescent lights in all the classrooms, and those fluorescent lights would sometimes buzz. They'd make this really annoying bzzz for a long period of time. And so rather than wait, I was good at that. Yeah, rather than wait for the light to start buzzing, they actually put a buzzer up in the lights, and they gave people a test to do, a math test to do. And one group of people, the lights are buzzing, and they'd have to take this math test for like a half hour, and it's loud and it's annoying. And by the end of the test, everyone did really badly because it was really annoying to have this buzz there. So you'd think, okay, that means being in the presence of something really annoying is bad for you. Only wait, there's more. So they had another group in which right at the beginning, the person giving the test said, listen, I apologize, the lights here are buzzing. If you want, we could walk 15 minutes across campus to another classroom that doesn't have the buzzing light in it. And of course, nobody wanted to walk 15 minutes across campus, so they said, no, we'll stay here. Give them the test, they take the test. Those people did just fine. Same buzzing light, only now they had chosen to be there because they knew they had the option not to be there, and now they were fine with it. Now, over the course of the next 4 years, you will be confronted with a number of things that are your psychological equivalent of an annoying buzzing light. But if you begin to recognize that you actually have the choice of where you want to be, and you explicitly choose to be there, that buzz is going to annoy you a lot less than if you feel like you're trapped there.
Yeah, and you know, the idea of choice making that Art and I are talking about, I know whenever we have discussions like this with university students, it seems somehow unrealistic because you feel like I have very little latitude, I really don't have the choice of that many things. And I'll tell you about a story about one of my grandchildren, because when you're a grandparent, it's obligatory every time you give a public presentation, you have to work one grandchild story in. So here we go.
Only one tonight.
I know. My grandchildren are genius babies. But my daughter, who was an elementary school teacher, she loves school. I mean, she loves school so much she never left school. She's still in school. And she wants her children to do well in school, as do I. I mean, doing well in school is a very lovely thing. And whenever it's time for grade reports to come out, and fortunately for my wife and me, they live here in Austin, I get to see them all the time, my daughter will say, hey, Ella, who's my older grandchild, go get your grade report and show it to Pop. She'll be out the grade report, and of course, I always got all A's over it and all that kind of stuff. And I look at that grade report, and I look at my sweet grandchild, and I say, Ella, I've looked at several grade reports, I don't see any B's on here. When are you going to get a B? You need some B's. Now, of course, my daughter is going apoplectic right now because she's hearing me say this. And she said, well, don't tell her that. And you know, the thing I think about in that is this, that we learn what to value based on the paired associates that become connected to the things that we do, right? And if we think that getting a grade from another human being who says you are A-worthy, or whatever, is like that's what you live for, is that. Well, then when you do get a B, even when you're trying to get an A, you can't then say, well, it's one class, you know, it's one teacher, what's the deal? You can't flip, right? As much as it matters the grade you get when you get an A, it's going to matter that much when you get a B or a C or whatever grade you get. And you all are smart enough to know, because you wouldn't have gotten in here if you weren't smart enough to know this, that that's not the measure of who you are. Right? I mean, you're in a place where you know lots of things that you're good at, you know lots of things that you're not very good at, and lots of things that you probably could be good at if you applied yourself a little bit. But to put yourself in a situation where your perception of how good you are and how capable you are depends on some other human beings telling you you got an A or you got a 97.2 or whatever it happens to be, is putting you in a situation of vulnerability that's unnecessary. Right? One of my favorite comments I ever got from an undergraduate teacher, a very bizarre history professor I had when I was an undergraduate. He was bizarre in all the most wonderful, bizarre ways.
So you took after him.
Exactly. He used to wear flip-up sunglasses, and he would forget to take them off, so they'd be flipped up, and he'd always be do this whole lecture with his flip-up sunglasses on. And he said, you know, a high GPA is a sign of dedication and commitment and love of learning. And a very high GPA is a sign of a misspent youth. I love that.
Yeah.
Now, I know a lot of you, probably some of you in here are pre-med, and what I just said, you're coming out of your skin right now. But I just want to say, I certainly understand the contingencies that are necessary for you to get into med school, for you to get into a graduate program, whatever it happens to be. But I think when that becomes the focus of your attention as a learner, you miss opportunities, as Art was saying earlier, to do things that don't seem immediately beneficial because you think, well, how's this going to contribute to my grade in the class, the GPA, all that kind of thing?
You know, and I think to follow up on that, I think there's a couple of things that are really important. So one of them is to remember that, well, let me ask you a question. How many of you, think of any adult that you've hung out with that you know who's gone to college. It might be a parent, it might be a teacher, it might be a friend of the family, whatever it is. How many of you have ever seen their college transcript? I mean, really? Nobody walks around with their college transcript showing you what their grades were.
Well, actually, since you asked.
There you go, except Bob. Because it doesn't matter. Really, in the grand scheme of life, there's like a very narrow window in which your transcript may matter a little bit, the grades that you got. What's really going to matter after this is what you got out of it. And the only way that you're going to get things out of this that you really are going to use later is to find a way to love the things that you do. And that sounds goofy. Right? I mean, here's an old guy saying, love the things you do. But you know, it turns out, and this returns back to Bob's point about happiness, the happiest people in the world are the ones who ultimately see their life as a calling. But the things that they do, they are driven to do because they want to do them, because they need to do them, because they love to do them. And that each day is an adventure that they're excited to be a part of. Now, there's a particular time of life, usually around the age of 18, where that's an incredibly hokey thing to do, because at some point it's kind of cool to be a little cynical about stuff. But the fact is that one of the things that is the marker of a successful college career is that at some point you fall in love, not just with another human being, though that can be wonderful, that's the subject of a different talk, but that you fall in love with things, with learning and with ideas, and use those to drive you to want to learn new things and to want to connect yourself to other people. Because if you're going to see the rest of your life as a calling, then in order to do that, the research all suggests you have to be willing to connect yourself to things that are bigger than yourself. And so while you are definitely in college to learn some things and to nail that transcript and make it as beautiful as possible, what you're really here for is to learn how you're going to learn things that will make your life matter something bigger than just the individual pieces of it.
And you know, as I'm listening to us talk, as I occasionally do, you know, it can sound like we're just philosophizing up here, you know, but actually we're psychologists.
We got data.
I know we got data. And one of the things that's interesting about
We're
data,
philosophers with data.
I know, exactly. That's sort of non-intuitive. That's a huge thing to think about. Is, you know, happiness contributes to learning. Well-restedness contributes to learning. General physical health contributes to learning. And all of the things that we understand about the way brains work reveals the fact that, unlike what we think from inside our consciousness, that we have a body, and that body carries around our brain, and that brain carries around our mind, and that mind is us, that's a false categorization of what's going on. Our minds and our bodies are a thing, right? It's all connected. And we tend to think that, you know, the physical stuff is sort of removed from the cerebral stuff, right? But all this stuff is so tightly interconnected, it's literally inseparable. So what your emotions are doing, which are affected by your physiology, are affecting your memory formation, your ability to recall information, your ability to refine a skill. All of that is hooked up together. And I think, when we think about how we work, how our bodies work, and how our minds work, we tend to imagine that the body stuff is separate from the mind stuff and the thinking stuff. And it's not. It's all together. And the consequences of that, which are, to us, fascinating, right, is that to everything that we learn, everything we remember, everything we learn how to do and refine a skill in, all of those things are tightly connected to physiology, cognition, emotion, and all of that stuff is bound together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, we've reached the portion of the program, since you've stuck with us for this long, that I like to call, how do I really study for tests? You guys are psychologists, tell us how this works. Cognitive psychology actually has learned a tremendous amount about what it is that you need to do to get good grades in the event that you want to get good grades. And I have good news and bad news. The good news is we understand how that works. The bad news is everything you always feared is true. You have to actually study often. So one of the things that we know about studying is that what's called distributed practice is better than massed practice. Massed practice is what we call cramming. Okay? Distributed practice is when you actually start doing the reading when it was assigned and continue doing it until the exam.
Bizarre.
I know,
bizarre.
crazy. Yeah. Distributed practice leads to better learning and longer long-term retention. That's one. Number two, you got to process deeply. Yeah, how many of you have ever read a passage of really dense prose, and as you're reading it, you suddenly become a grammar checker because you can't concentrate anymore? So what you're reading is going, yep, English, or whatever language you're reading, yep, that's English too, more words, lovely. Right, I think there was a verb there.
Yeah.
Right. At that point, stop reading. Go do something else for a while, come back later, because actually in order to learn, you've got to think about stuff carefully. One of the things that fascinates me about learning is that nobody would assume that you could learn to play a musical instrument without picking up that instrument. And nobody would think that you could shoot a free throw successfully without actually practicing shooting some free throws. And yet, when it comes time to studying for exams, we often think, well, if I just read the material, that's sufficient.
Carefully.
As if,
carefully.
As if I'm just going to have to read the questions when I get to the exam. You have to answer stuff. Learning conceptual material, unfortunately, is just as active a process as learning to play a musical instrument or learning to shoot a free throw. You have to answer questions and practice in the way that you're going to use the information. So that the bad news is that yes, you have to sleep, yes, you have to test yourself, yes, you have to practice often. No, you can't put the book under the pillow and hope that the words will drift up.
Well, how thick is the pillow?
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
And no matter how often you play the audio book while you're asleep, it's not going to teach you anything. And on top of that, all those apps that promise to quadruple your reading speed will not help you.
Although they will make a lot of money for the people selling
They
the
will,
apps.
yes. Yes.
Let me say,
Go ahead.
Okay. Let me say a couple of things about what Art was saying. Because there's a jargon word that's actually a useful piece of jargon. And that is, when Art's saying you need to actually do something when you're reading, the lingo in this is retrieval practice. The thing about getting stuff into your memory also involves getting the stuff out.
And I hate that. You're like, I know this. I know I read this.
Exactly. And so if you don't practice getting it out, you have no idea what's really in there. Now, I tell you what doesn't help. And many of you do this. This is going to be just really dramatic. highlighting is a terrible strategy. Now, let me tell you why highlighting is so reinforcing.
Wait.
Yeah, exactly. Let me tell you why highlighting is so reinforcing. Because when you bought your book, all the pages were white, and now they're yellow. So something happened, right? Yes, something happened. You colored your book, but you didn't learn anything, right?
In second grade.
Think about this for just a minute. As you're coloring, there's no retrieval practice. If you're thinking about, I want to remember something, and you read a section of a textbook that has to do with some idea, and you say, let me close the textbook for a minute and see if I can reconstitute that idea that I just read, looking away from it. What will happen? You'll remember some parts, you'll find that you don't remember some parts, and that error making will motivate your brain to expend the biological energy to form a memory when you open the book back up and say, oh, that was the thing that I forgot. That's how you create signals to your brain to do the work to make a memory. Coloring won't do it.
And one other thing.
Go.
One other thing. Leave your laptop at home, or not at home, but in whatever you're calling home here. Don't bring your laptop to class for two reasons.
Data.
One,
we have data.
There's data on this. There's data on both of these. First of all, one problem is Facebook or whatever the current thing, Reddit, because the problem.
What about MySpace? Is
Well,
that still
I don't think that. No,
okay,
I don't
right.
think so. No. Pinterest, anyone? So the reason that one problem is the invitation to multitask. So the human brain doesn't multitask. So while you're on Facebook or Reddit, you're not in class. But even if you have the willpower to avoid the internet while you're in class, there's another problem. It turns out that taking notes by hand is actually better than typing stuff out on your computer, because most of us can type fast enough that we can almost create a transcript of what the professor's saying while they're saying it. And when you do that, you don't think about it at all, you just type it. And so then you don't actually hear the lecture and grapple with it. But if you write your notes out, then you have to think about it enough to summarize it in order to write something down. And even if you have terrible handwriting like I do, and you never are able to read your notes later, it doesn't really matter you get a little bit of a boost from reading your notes over later, but most of the boost comes from thinking about it and writing stuff out. So leave the laptop closed. Bring a tablet. If you need an electronic device or you're going to go crazy, then bring a tablet and a stylus and write that way. But do it by hand, because it turns out, at least in this case, the old school is actually best for school.
Yeah, and
that could be a pillow.
That could be a pillow too. I mean, the things that we're talking about now, really, the reason we find them so interesting is because how non-intuitive they are. Right? There are so many things that we've come to think that seem to make logical sense. Well, of course, if I'm highlighting important sentences in my book, of course that will make them more memorable to me.
And everyone else highlights.
That's right, except, well, no, that's not true. If I actually can get down everything the professor says, or can copy everything off the slide, of course that will help you remember it more. Well, actually, it doesn't. And the thing that's interesting about human behavior, and Art and I talk about this in many dimensions of human behavior and thinking and emotions and those kinds of things, is that there are a lot of things that make perfect intuitive sense that are nevertheless incorrect. And one of the reasons that we explain that is our brains did not really evolve in a way that allows us to understand intuitively how they work. What I think, one of my favorite phrases that Art says, except I'm going to say it, I'm not going to let him say it, is that everybody has a brain, but very few people actually know how they work. And we have intuitive ideas that come from inside of our own consciousness. We think the way the world works is we think about something and then we say it. Or we think about something and we decide and we act. Or we think about something and we write it down. That's almost never what happens. So the writing part by hand, the actual doing part, the creating intellectual effort to make something happen, those are precisely the processes by which we learn. It's a fascinating thing. This is why Art and I study this, because we are fascinating. Not just Art and me, but all of us. But the thing that's interesting for all of you is if you step back and say, okay, so what are my beliefs about how to effectively navigate school? And is it worth my time to actually see how many of those and which of those actually comport with our understanding of human learning and psychology? And you know, we just got a terrific signal. It was a great place to stop because now I have a thing on that sign there that says time's up. But Art's going to say one thing.
Before you go, I want you to do one thing on your way out. Before you check your email, before you check the baseball scores.
They've already checked their email. What are you talking about?
Before you go and do that, I want you all to sit and think for a moment, what are the 3 most important things that I got out of this? Not just for me, not just to make us feel good, but because here's a new habit for you. No matter what you do, whether you read something or go to a lecture or read a book, when you're done, remember that you're going to remember approximately 3 things about it later, and you need to control what those are. So spend some time summarizing that on your way out, and thanks.
Thanks.
So I'm going to give you time to think of those 3 things. But before we break up, I want to give these 2 another round of applause. That was fantastic. I also want to acknowledge the Audrey and Bernard Rappaport Excellence Fund that actually made all of this possible through their generous support. And I thought I'd give you an opportunity to plug your radio show one more time. So what time is it on, and how do they find it?
Every Friday, 2 Guys on Your Head is on KUT 90.5 at 7:50 in the morning, at 1:50 in the afternoon, and at 4:50 later in the afternoon.
But you have another thing you can do. If you don't want to listen to the radio, we are also a podcast on iTunes. We're on SoundCloud, and so here's an assignment for you guys. Help us. We are currently about the 12th ranked social science podcast in the world. Help us.
How many are there?
There's thousands. There's thousands. There's thousands. There literally are thousands. Help us to be number 1, okay? Like, YouTube should be awesome. Tell all your friends. Hit 2 Guys on Your Head on iTunes. Make us number 1 tomorrow. You'll make Rebecca McEnroy really, really happy.
Whoever she is.
All right? Trust me, you want her to be happy.
For those of you who want to stick around, they'll be around for about 20 minutes to talk to you.